We'll go ahead and get started now. Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Elena Fromer, and I am the AME Center Lab Manager. For those of you who are not familiar with our center here at UCSF, Doctors Aric Prather and Elissa Epel are our directors, and we conduct research on how people can thrive both body and mind while undergoing many different types of stress. Our center is comprised of many different faculty, postdoctoral scholars, staff, and collaborators from all over the world to better understand improving emotional regulation, coping mechanisms, or daily lifestyle and restorative behaviors such as sleep, physical activity, social connectivity, and how these may improve biological and psychological resilience to aging. If you'd like to be more involved with our lab, we encourage you to check out our website. We have some monthly scientific talks that you can find under our events page on our website. You can also subscribe to our newsletter. We send that out around 3 times a year with some information on events, retreats, new research studies, and any new research findings that we produce. And also, if you are looking to find some more resources about the stress prescription or the sleep prescription, we encourage you to look at both Dr. Prather and Dr. Epel's personal websites. They have a variety of different resources and information on there for you to check out. And so with that, I'm going to hand things off to our postdoc, Ryan, and she'll take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Elena. So my name's Ryan Brown, and you might see an L or a Len in the middle of my name because Ryan Brown often does not elicit the picture of me, a woman. So you might see an L around there. And I'm just honored to work with Elissa and Aric on questions around stress and aging and the work that they've done. I mean, when I started here, I started to realize how many times from the beginning of my graduate training, even back in undergrad, I was citing each of them. So it's really exciting for me to be able to be here with y'all, both as a mentee of theirs and to bring up how their books are impacting everyone that is reading them. We're getting really great daily habits from them, as well as really nicely distilled summaries of the science as it stands today. And I think that that will be a really great message and way for the general public to sort of move forward with this science. And it'll be nice to see updates and as decades pass on the state of each of their lines of research. So with that, I would love to hear more from Dr. Prather on why he wrote the sleep prescription, excuse me, and all of the burgeoning reasons that you ended up focusing on sleep in your research and to this point.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. It's so great to do this. Elissa and I have kind of talked about having these sorts of events in the past, and so it's really great that we had these books come out so that we could begin to connect with our community near and far. Because I feel like we're stronger together, and we're just excited that you're here and that we can kind of share this work with you. So, as a sleep scientist, I am just mystified by the power of sleep. We all do it. We all do it better on some nights and worse on others. And we can tell when it's not working well, right? The science really is shedding light on the positive benefits of sleep, say kind of improving our mood, improving our memory, our cognition, and then kind of what happens when we don't get the right amount of sleep. It's a risk factor for depression. It impacts our immune system. And so, we want people to get the rest that they need. I help run a clinic at UCSF focused on treating people with insomnia, and specifically focusing on using a technique called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBT-I. There's lots of CBTs for lots of different things like depression, anxiety, OCD, panic disorder, but the one for insomnia is special in my mind. It really harnesses these behavioral techniques that are focused on leveraging our sleep biology to kind of get sleep working the way it should. I always say that people never even wonder how sleep works until it stops. And then when it stops, it becomes very distressing. And so, over the years that I've been kind of treating people and using this technique, I've just been struck by how effective it is. But there's a scalability problem, right? There's not enough sleep clinicians. There's not enough access. For instance, I just got an email today for our clinic that, we have like 5 more openings for the rest of the year and 75 people that are on the referral list. And so, what can we do? How can we kind of move both kind of the science and kind of improve the lives of many out there? And that's what this book was about. Really, it was about my opportunity to try to distill the principles of this therapy in a way that is kind of more bite-sized, that can get people moving in the right direction. I think of it as a recipe more so than a menu, right? Like all of these things that are in this book, and we'll talk about some of it today, provide the ingredients to get people's sleep back on track. And so I was just really honored to have that opportunity. I do mostly research, and that's what we do in the AME Center, but the ability to actually describe these techniques, to try to provide illustrative examples of what works. And it's been really meaningful to get the feedback from people that, in a lot of ways, it kind of touched a nerve, right? Because we all suffer with sleep problems from time to time, and that's natural, but it doesn't have to be chronic. And so that need to try to provide some kind of clinical guidance is what was really behind me working on this.
Yeah, it's such a great point too on the access to mental health care broadly. And I think that what each book does a really great job of doing is distilling these into bite-sized pieces that don't make you feel more overwhelmed by your lack of sleep or by the stress you're experiencing, right? And I think that it's beautiful that we're able to sort of meld these two books together, because like you both talk about in your books, there is the cyclical relationship between stress and sleep. And so it's really helpful to be able to consider sort of how our sleep affects how we perceive our stress, and how some stress can affect how we sleep. And so with that, I'd love to hear more from Dr. Epel also on sort of why you wrote this book, and focusing more on our stress prescription.
Thank you so much, Ryan. I share Aric and Elena's enthusiasm at directly speaking to those of you who have joined AME, joined our newsletter, who are some of our colleagues, our co-researchers, as well as people who are just using science and doing this type of work in their own way, disseminating science. So we are happy to be connected. So the sleep prescription is really a distillation of the best empirically supported practices for reducing stress. And after 30 years of studying the mind-body connection, studying the different ways stress does harm, the ways that toxic chronic stress gets under the skin to speed up aging, it was very fun, and I'll say even a relief, to just zoom in and focus on the things we can do in a day within 5 minutes or 10 minutes that change our mindset, that change our mind-body state, that reduce stress. It has been a good reminder for me. I study this. How have I stayed fascinated in this topic for 30 years? I'm a high stress person by temperament. I use all of these strategies myself, not all at once. So my hope is that the book will help in their day. That becomes kind of the infrastructure of their day, or part of their landscape of the day. Because really stress reduction is based on lifestyle and habits, and the small habits we have add up over time to influence our aging. So the earlier book that I wrote with my colleague, a Nobel laureate, Elizabeth Blackburn, was about healthy aging, the telomere effect. And we had one chapter on stress, and that was so interesting to people and such a big lever over daily biological states that foster either restoration, repair, or more stress catabolic processes. People wanted to know more. So this book is, a little bit about the biology of aging, but mostly about what we can do about it and how we can take more control over our daily health. how quickly our body can respond to different strategies, different mindsets, different practices, slowing our breathing, changing up the scenery. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, awesome. And I love in your book, Dr. Epel, I really appreciated the metaphor of our boat floating through the ocean, and the water is going to be there, and the main piece is sort of how we can keep it out. And a big piece of that is sleep. So I think going back to some of the practical takeaways, tips that Dr. Prather has given us, can you share more of sort of your favorite tips and what maybe you use in your daily life the most?
Yeah, yeah, thanks. It's funny, like I have my favorite tips and then I have like my real life of like what I do, right? Like not always, they don't always meet, but I think that's part of it. I think that's part of the, like, everyone can struggle with this and that's okay, right? It's and it's really about kind of making habits stick and to increase the probability that you'll have a good night's sleep, right? And so there are lots of things that we can do to do that. And so I kind of outline them. I mean, the premise of this book is really that, like, the things that we can do to improve our sleep aren't happening just like the moments before we get in bed. In fact, they start the moment we wake up. And so in fact, the first thing that I always tell people if they're trying to work on their sleep is to do something that happens right in the morning. And so that's kind of maintaining a stable wake up time 7 days a week. And so, a lot of people, and I talk to a lot of people about this, they're like, but I love sleeping in on the weekends and I can't do that. And, why are you kind of robbing me of the kind of make-up sleep? And I think the important thing is that, if you don't have sleep problems, then you probably don't need to read this book. Though you can gain from it in case sleep problems come up. But if you're going to work on your sleep, you want to work on something that you can control. And it's a shift in the mind a little bit, because sleep is not something that we make happen, right? Like, sleep is something that comes to us, that it kind of washes over us. And when you tell someone who has insomnia, like, okay, you're going to have to go to bed at the same time, that can actually be really distressing, right? Because I say, they're like, the sleep doctor said, go to bed by 10:30. And, at 10:20, they're not sleepy. At 10:25, they're not sleepy. And then that kind of ramps up this anxiety. But the thing we can do is, control the time that we wake up. And why that's so important is that it works on the two primary regulators of our sleep. The first is our circadian rhythm, right? Our internal clock. Our body is really sensitive to external cues in the environment and wanting to know what is going to happen next. And by maintaining a stable wake time, it really helps entrain that, right? It ensures that that we get up out of bed at the same time, we get sunlight in our eyes at the same time, we go through those processes of what our day looks like around the same time, and just keeping within time that way can be really helpful in regulating our sleep. The second reason is because the second regulator of our sleep is what's called our homeostatic sleep drive. And this is kind of our need for sleep that builds up throughout the day. I think about it as kind of a balloon, right? So like, we wake up in the morning and our balloon is flat, and then it kind of builds with sleepiness throughout the day, getting bigger and bigger and bigger until it's at kind of an optimal amount, and we feel that sleepiness and we go to sleep and it kind of drains out throughout the night. But if we shift when we wake up in the morning, our balloon starts filling at different rates, right? Like, so if you sleep until noon, you're probably not going to feel sleepy around the same time at night, and things can get dysregulated. So if you want to kind of put things on track, the first thing you want to do is wake up at the same time each night. And then the other main thing that I think is really important actually does happen at bedtime, and that's not going to bed when you're not sleepy. And if you wake up in the middle of the night and you can't sleep, you don't want to stay tossing and turning in bed, because if you do this chronically, it actually fractures your relationship with the bed, right? The bed itself is a really critical environmental trigger. It tells your body that, like, oh, I sleep here, and it turns out people who don't have sleep problems, they may feel sleepy before they get in bed, but the bed itself is like a hammer coming down on them to make them go to sleep. But when you have multiple nights of spending time kind of awake in bed, worrying about the day, worrying about how things should have gone differently, worrying about the fact that you're not sleeping, all of those things create for your body a place of anxiety, and over time can be create a conditioned arousal. So it's one of those things where we we may, people may feel sleepy before they get in bed, but then when they get in bed, it actually triggers an active mind. And that is that conditioned arousal. And so the only way to really break that is to repair it with sleepiness. So, if you're awake in the middle of the night, you want to, give yourself a few minutes to see if you can get back to sleep. But if not, you want to actually remove yourself from the situation, go somewhere quiet until you begin to feel sleepy again, and then repair that relationship with the bed. So you're actually kind of breaking the one of like the angstiness in the bed. And then when you feel sleepy again, you're kind of repairing it. And now this doesn't happen overnight. It's not easy. And it's actually kind of this dance in the beginning. Like you may try it and then get back in bed and your brain wakes back up. And that's just evidence that there's this real conditioned arousal. But over time, it becomes more reliable and it will help facilitate getting back to sleep. So those are my kind of two biggest things that I would have people urge to try. But there, of course, a list of them. But we certainly want to give Elissa time to talk about her tips and tricks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I really like how in both books, there's so much thought around how our evolutionarily very adaptive anticipation of stress or of sleep or of whatever the next thing we're going to do, just how we can use that knowledge to really promote better health, sleep, less stress, all of those things. And I'll turn it over to Dr. Epel. Give us your favorite tips or how you think about, how we can get off this roller coaster of the highest of highs and the lowest of lows.
Thank you, Ryan. I will, but I'll also take this opportunity to get to ask Aric something that I wondered. I mean, I knew you when you had your kids were little babies, and I'll say that wasn't your best sleep stages of life, but are you a good sleeper?
Am I? I go through phases. I'm definitely when stress is high, I experience everything like everyone else, right? Like, and what's interesting about it is it's like the kind of thing that we noticed during the pandemic. Our clinic always has had a long wait list, but what happened was the type of problems that people were experiencing changed, where it was a lot of wake up, a couple hours before your alarm, and then not being able to get back to sleep. And when I'm under stress, like when I'm writing a grant or working on, something that is stressful for me, that's the kind of thing that I experience. And it makes a lot of sense because, our sleep architecture changes across the night, right? And as we kind of drain out that balloon that I mentioned, our sleep just naturally gets lighter. We wake up a lot of times during the night and particularly in the early morning hours. And so if you have stress on board, it often can kind of prop up and make it difficult. I think what's the difference between what that's happening to me and to people who develop insomnia is I really try to take a mindset of this is okay. I can just rest. It's not, I'm not distressed about the fact that I'm not going to sleep. I know that I have the resilience to kind of steal away kind of the even bad days, because even on the best of circumstances, even when you get a good night of sleep, you may not have your best day. Right. But when people have insomnia, they really begin to see it as this one-to-one correlation that if I don't sleep, my day is going to be the worst day. And that's just not the case. And so if you keep that in mind, it can kind of soften the blow when you do have bad nights of sleep. Because as you mentioned, right, I have 2 kids. I haven't slept well since, right? This is 11 years of this. And they still come in our room in the middle of the night. And I don't know why. That's probably a different conversation that we need to have. But what it is we're kind of built for this, right? It's really about kind of, the risk of lack of sleep is really around the chronic habitual short amount of sleep and the insomnia. And insomnia is more than just kind of not getting sleep. It's the anxiety, it's the excess sympathetic nervous system activity that might create this wear and tear on our biology and accelerate aging.
Beautiful. Thank you. Always so honest. That is helpful. When writing these books, we live this too. You can be an expert and you can need all of these strategies still. I would love to invite our listeners to type any questions in the Q&A. We're going to have a whole 30 minutes for questions, and we can go deeper on any of these strategies. And any question you have, you're not the only one. There'll be many people who see this who will be helped by your question. So I was just going to give an overview of the types of strategies. Now, in terms of, stress reduction, there are things people know, like lifestyle is fundamental. We need sleep and when we don't get enough sleep, it makes us much more sensitive, more stress reactive, more grumpy. We just published papers showing that with David Newman, as well as, stress affects sleep, but sleep also affects daily stress. We know that exercise helps, but beyond, and meditation and yoga, but beyond these very well covered topics, there are many beautiful strategies from the stress literature, from the emotions literature that we can use. So there's a real diverse toolbox, and I'm going to divide it into 3 parts for you. So we can think about our, top-down strategies, our stress mindset, beliefs that we have about stress matter. They either create resilience to stress or vulnerability. And so we want to shift into thinking of the science-based reality that acute stress can be good for us when we view it as something that we can cope with, grow from, learn from. Those are positive stress beliefs that are both true based on a lot of science, and that help us create our own positive stress response. So there's kind of a positive feedback loop. When we're thinking positively about stress, we actually are creating a better, more adaptive, helpful mind-body response. We're mobilizing energy more in a helpful way. We're thinking more clearly. So that might all sound crazy, but beliefs for sure drive and determine our biological stress response. And of course, the other is true too, that our body shapes our mind. So we can directly change body states. I'll call this kind of bottom-up method. We can shift our body arousal states to help us cope with psychological stress. And what I mean by that is we can both shift into high arousal, stressful states that are short-term, that actually help us metabolize stress and process stress in the body and get rid of accumulated stress. And that is through breathing, heat exposure, cold exposure, as well as exercise, like high intensity interval training. There's a lot of science behind each of those. We can also use the body to reduce stress, reduce arousal. And that's what we typically think of as stress reduction: massage, meditation, yoga, shavasana, that beautiful deep relaxation state that we get after yoga. And then the third set of strategies is change up the scene, change the environment, create an environment full of safety cues, of things that make us feel relaxed and safe, both supportive people as well as cues like nature cues, pets. Not having being in your office is even implicitly going to create more of a triggered stress cue environment with phones, computers. You have to be kind of vigilant and on demand. The framework for these 3 strategies is, you saw the cover of the book, so it kind of went from a red dot all the way down from orange, yellow, green, and blue. And so we don't just always want to be relaxed and in these kind of blue mind states. We want to actually use stress and harness it for positive, energetic well-being. And so during stress, there are statements that we can say to ourselves that kind of, in a way, build psychological resilience to stress. So those are all covered in the book. And I think I should probably, I will say 2 more quick things. One is, it's important to take a stress assessment and just really have an honest look of the situations in your life that are stressing you out. They may be part of your daily schedule and how you schedule your day. And I am, I'll say, chronically managing daily schedules to be less stressful. We can stack our schedule, have no breaks, and that's just depleting. And there's no way around that. The body is meant to have breaks. So you might think of it as a battery that we need to recharge. And burnout is this lack of ability to have a dynamic arousal state throughout the day, but to be on all day. And then, to think we can turn off at the end, like Aric says, we're not a laptop you can just close and then have good sleep. We need to actually prepare for sleep and to be having these different kind of positive stressors, as well as more deep relaxation states during the day. So stress assessment is helpful. The book leads you through that, as well as recognizing that a big source of our stress is situations that we actually don't have much control over. We spend a lot of mental real estate, a lot of time and effort problem solving situations that we actually can't change anyway. It's just that we think we're exerting control by thinking and ruminating and doing a lot of mental, I'm going to say we think it's problem solving, but it's really just trigger. It's a form of chronic stress, triggering thoughts about situations that we care about, that are concerning to us. So for example, situations that involve trying to change other people, worrying about other people, people's or work situations or life situations that we are will do better working on acceptance and focusing on the little slice of what we can change about a situation, rather than like wishing the situation was different. So we've done lots of studies on mind wandering and have found that like the negative mind state of wishing things were different is just like a toxic stress thought. It's associated with shorter telomeres and with more unhappiness, more negative affect. Whereas being present, being engaged, in a sense, living your life is in the moment and not doing a lot of mental time travel is associated with longer telomeres and more positive or happy mood states. So I will end there and turn it back to Ryan.
Oh, that's wonderful. That actually leads, and we have a couple of questions in the chat, and I have some that came in via email as well. But that actually leads really well into a question that I had for both of you. Just as we're in this high technology, we can get so much information about our stress levels, our sleep, like how well we're sleeping. And I'm just curious how each of y'all think about at what point wearables are helpful versus hurting, and especially as you're talking about with when it potentially is contributing to feeling like, wishing we were sleeping better, wishing we were doing these things. And instead of, I had a friend in town this weekend who was saying, we have these incredible wearables and I get all of this data, but what do I do with it, kind of a thing. And so I'm just curious how y'all think about what's the border of when these are helpful versus potentially more harmful, or something just to say, put away and like live your life and control and not try to exert complete control.
I'm looking at the Aric, definitely deals with that all the time.
Oh yeah, it's so interesting as like a sleep scientist type person, because the wearable technologies have been transformational for trying to understand people's sleep, for getting people interested in sleep, right? It's one of these metrics that people, prior to that, it was just like they, thought they fell asleep, something happened, and they woke up and they had no way to record it. And now we can see kind of like how much we get, how it's broken up, kind of how our temperature might change, how the stages might change. And that's really exciting. It gets people to really understand when they make changes in their behavior, what happens, right? And I think that's where they're really powerful, is less so on kind of the specific absolute numbers, because people can get really hung up on that. And it can actually create a lot of anxiety. In fact, there is a condition coined several years ago now called orthosomnia. So like insomnia, but called orthosomnia. That is an insomnia that develops because of the hyper focus on these wearable technologies, right? This concern that like, oh, I get so little deep sleep, like what is happening to my brain and what's going to happen to my health? And so these can be kind of helpful tools, and it can engage you in kind of the trying to become your own personal sleep scientist. But it's not the final say on what's going on. I mean, it's not the same as like a research grade, come into the lab, see what's going on. And so that's where there's a little bit of that tension, right? So like on one hand, it's like been really important for the sleep field, but at the same time has created a little bit of problem when it kind of goes too far towards kind of this hyper focus on what the numbers are telling you.
I love what you mentioned there about how we can use it to see the behavior change impact, and especially, just around like dry January and things like that. I think that one of the most powerful places that people see that is when you stop drinking alcohol for an extended period of time, right?
That's the example I always use. Okay. Like, it's like if you want to see how, a change in your sleep, kind of drink alcohol right before bed and not. And I promise that there will be a difference that you're like, wow, I mean, it's funny, right? Because you're like, I already knew I didn't feel good. But now you can see it in the data, like, right? It's like, so there's something special about that. But I mean, that's a great example. Exercise is a really good, another good example. Any kind of substance that you use before bed, not just alcohol, but, caffeine, marijuana, any of those things, those should come out. And that's where it's like, it's this at the individual level, like seeing the change in your numbers are really meaningful. The change in the absolute numbers might not be so much because of the differences in how things are measured, but that percent difference within an individual is probably real. And it's a great way to kind of test these little things on and see how your sleep is impacted. Yeah.
That's great. Yeah. So individual change and knowing that we're broadly more resilient than we even think we probably are, even if we're sleeping less or anything like that. That's great. So we have a few questions in the chat that I want to go through. So the first question is from Enrique, and he is asking, so he lives in a third world country and the levels of stress are really large. So there's corporation violence, no job opportunities, all of that kind of like structural level stress. And so he's asking how we can deal with these levels of stress and improve quality of sleep, knowing that day by day, this is really the normal for the context.
Ryan, I'll take the first stab at that.
Yeah.
Beautiful question. Thank you, Enrique. But I first will just add that I could, as someone in my earlier years who had a pretty colorful case of insomnia. I mean, if I looked at the clock in the middle of the night, that would just start my mind on all those thoughts Aric talked about of I'm not going to be able to function next day. So I could never have used a monitor. And now I just take delight in looking at my Oura Ring sleep results and don't have a lot of distress when I have a bad night. It's more just validating. But the idea that we have a little bit of control and we can see that when we monitor is what is empowering about that more than just the assessment. And in terms of monitoring stress, I think that the ability to see things like our heart rate and our respiration, and to a lesser extent, our heart rate variability, because we can't see like immediate changes in that sometimes, those are also ways of raising awareness. And none of these strategies work without some level of awareness, body awareness, interoceptive awareness, just the mindful practice of checking in. You all can just do it right now, just asking and looking inside and doing your own mindful check-in or assessment of how much am I feeling tension in my body? Where is it stored? Are my hands clenched? Are my brows furrowed? You can catch a lot of stress that way. And once you have caught it, you can release it with breathing, with mindful strategies, with yoga. I mean, there are many different ways to release stress, but you can't do that unless you're aware and notice it. So I think that the biosensors are helpful for things like breathing rate, which we can immediately change with slow breathing, one of our direct paths. Okay, on to Aric. Did you have any comment on? Okay, so on to this question from Enrique, which is, yes, it's great to have tips. I live in a country where there's violence, low job opportunities, high levels of stress. How can I sleep when this is our normal day, our normal context that we wake up to? How can I sleep well? How can I let my nervous system relax? It's a great question. And I feel like you're asking the question that we all need to contend with these days, even in these, safer countries. We have global existential stress due to climate change, due to wars, due to political divisiveness and instability. We're just living in this new unstable world. So we've always had the uncertainty of the day, personal uncertainty in our own lives. And now we live with something that's much more volatile and dramatic, which is unstable environment and unstable social and political environment. So the type of strategies that we want to think about and add are really stepping back and having some spiritual urgency about our life, which is the which is what happens when people are facing end of life. They realize the preciousness of life, or facing a chronic disease or terminal disease. You reprioritize your time in life because it's uncertain. And really, for all of us, it's uncertain. We really can't bank on knowing how long we have to live, when we have to die. And what that does for us, this kind of honest reprioritizing of what matters to us in our life, is that it helps us focus on what matters most, what our purpose of life is, and living that each day. And for me, it's been interesting to feel so vulnerable to the climate, being in California, where we now have a lot of wildfires and smoke and recently floods, and to try to, understand, just as one person, that we can still be taking daily actions toward reducing suffering, even if it's just helping one other person or helping in our local environment. That's what we can touch, and that's what is meaningful. Not that we can solve the political corruption, but we can do something under our control. So I think purpose, kind of defining and sharpening daily purpose, waking up and asking, what do I have today that feels meaningful to me? And the other strategies about balancing our nervous system and getting sleep are still fundamentals. We still, even more than ever, need to let our body know when it's safe and allow ourselves to let go of stress that we're holding when we can, when we are safe, when we're between challenges. Aric, did you want to add?
It's such a great question. And I think it is, as you said, a struggle. It's a struggle. And I think as the chaos that ensues around all of us ebbs and flows, it will, there will be times where it's really challenging. And I think this is a good example of where kind of the strategies that you provide will have a really important spillover effect on sleep, right? Because as sleep is about letting go, right? And like that requires kind of some feeling of safety. I think we benefit from the fact that sleep is like, it's been conserved across species, across millennia. Like, I have not interacted with anybody where I'm like, you know what, I think your sleep system's just broken. Like, it's not broken. It's in there. It's like part of the lived experience and is required for kind of being alive. And so, but when we're kind of hyper vigilant, when our mind is really active, when kind of our thoughts get away from us, that's where, your sympathetic nervous system, your arousal system can really even kind of overcome that growing balloon, right? And so I think the types of things that you mentioned will be really helpful in kind of centering people on kind of what their body needs most. And in this instance, during the night, typically, that's where you can maybe get some peace and get some rest. But that's not to take away from kind of the clear challenges that so many are facing.
Another related question on this front, and that ties into what you were saying there too, Dr. Prather, is around just the hypervigilance of our societies today. So Christy is asking, we have these great strategies for the individual level, and she's curious if y'all have any recommendations or things that you would advocate for at the environmental or more systemic level to help facilitate healthy sleep and lower stress responses.
Christy White is our close colleague who inspires us with her climate action. One thing to remember is that if we are trying to contribute, to have purpose in our life, to help the earth, to help sustainability, to help reduce the climate crisis, we will never see the outcome of our individual efforts. And so kind of realizing that we can control and plant seeds now in our life, and that is an incredibly powerful thing to do these days, to be alive at this time when our actions matter so much. That is what matters, is what we can do in our short lifetime, and hope that that will have effects 7 generations from now and will affect our children and our children's children. But it is a long trajectory that we all face. We know there'll be more heating, things will get worse before they get better. But this kind of turning toward working together and caring and valuing climate and sustainability, this is where we're at. We're part of a tipping point right now because of the crisis. And that's the beauty that I see in the crisis, is that we've got to stop sweating the small things and valuing the extraction and the materialism. And we all know that at some level, and are going to be forced to become part of this big green army with these changes. So Christy, I know that you make a huge difference to those around you. You inspire me and other people with your climate awareness, education, your helping people with climate distress. So those are all beautiful examples. Using nature is another really powerful way to connect with our core essence of what we care about and calm us from feeling like scared animals. So nature green effects are really well studied. They blew me away. It was my favorite part of writing this book, was to really go deep and learn about all the ways that green and water and nature sounds are affecting our nervous system in ways that we feel, but we didn't really know were validated by science. So there's a lot of reason for us to take breaks and be with nature, even if it's just a wild plant in your house, to really notice and appreciate the green world around us.
That was really one of my favorite sections in your book also. And I think that my favorite line was like, we build cities on top of nature and it bursts joyfully everywhere it can. And I think that honestly is inspiring. My afternoon walk, going out and finding the places that nature is bursting through, I think is a beautiful metaphor for where we are, even if we are in a city, that, we do have nature bursting literally through the sidewalks.
I guess in response to Christy's question, and thanks for the question, Christy. I think it's true. And I guess I think when I think about sleep, there's certainly a relationship between kind of environmental factors and sleep. I think I am really struck by the kind of systemic differences that occur, particularly with respect to racial differences in sleep, and the fact that sleep opportunity is not evenly distributed across the population, right? And a lot of that is due to systemic issues of where people live, socioeconomic indicators, noise pollution, light pollution, crime, this need to feel safe, right? And it's hard to let go and be vulnerable when you're at risk, right? And I really see these sleep disparities as kind of and from like a social justice lens, that everyone deserves the opportunity for rest. And I think there are a lot of kind of important policy opportunities to, from at all levels about kind of time schedules for people that have to do shift work, thinking about how people have to use their time in commuting that might rob them of opportunities for sleep, urban planning and like where people get to live and who gets to live there. All of these things have trickle-down effects to families, and individuals, families that might have to share a room with multiple people, that will impact their ability to sleep soundly. All of these things are, in my opinion, kind of a travesty and not in line with the values that we should have as a country and as a world. And I think, the metric of success can often be whether people get the sleep they need to kind of live the life they want. And so, I completely resonate with that. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there, but we do have a long way to go.
And one really clear sort of policy mismatch with the science, to my knowledge and my understanding of your book, Dr. Prather, too, was around teenagers' sleep schedules and school times. And so one of the next questions was around sort of any age range specific recommendations, or are there certain approaches that work better for certain people of different ages as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yeah, thanks you. It looks like Jennifer Groves with that question. And I think, so the things in this book, like in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, the techniques are applicable across the age spectrum, at least from like middle childhood, probably till old age. But at high school, right, there are these kind of changes that happen in adolescence, particularly in changing our circadian rhythm and our circadian preference to stay up later, right? And so that is a real biological thing. And so we have to keep that in consideration of individual sleep. Now, obviously, there's a behavioral component, right? Like as kids go into teenage years, they're kind of glued to technology. And that's not surprising, right? Like we've all experienced kind of the reward that we get from kind of social media, but it can be particularly toxic among adolescents, right? Because there's this kind of inherent need to be part of the group, this inherent need to be engaged in this, and that behavior kind of just makes that delayed sleep phase worse. Coupled by the fact that we do have often policies that mandate early school start times, though that's changing. California is a great example where it was the first state to mandate later school start times for high school, and we're hoping that middle school is not far behind. But it's so that I think that's just the one little wrinkle, is that like we do have kind of an endogenous rhythm, and it turns out for adolescents it just happens to be later, which causes some additional problems with respect to their sleep opportunity.
That's great. And I love that part of Jennifer's comment too was just how early we're laying the foundation for our stress responses and sleep patterns, and just already we're fully on that hamster wheel. So I really I just appreciate that from Jennifer, focusing on sort of changing these patterns or our awareness of these patterns earlier on, because it does set us up for life. And I'm curious, Dr. Epel, if you have any thoughts there on sort of the most promising strategies for young adults or teenagers.
I love the question. Thank you, Jennifer. We do have a very serious youth and young adult mental health crisis. When we look at the data, and I believe that Yochai, who also asked about age and stress, has been studying this, we know that there is, for example, if we look at young women, 60% feel they feel such high levels of stress, so overwhelmed that they can't cope. That is like a really big red alarm. I mean, it's incredibly alarming to us because as stress scientists, we know what that means every day. And we know if that goes on chronically, that is going to have repercussions for major mental health and early onset of physical health problems. So that's, it's partly why our books are prescriptions. They're as important to manage stress and sleep as medical conditions, because they are the precursor. So we believe, one thing to think about with children is, well, first of all, they can learn these strategies. The younger, the better, that being mindful, paying attention to their body, breathing, understanding the mind, that is some, part of the fundamental education, especially in this new era of existential stress, that they have, they're not just a pinball responding to what they see on the news or social media, but they're actually understanding their scary thoughts are just thoughts, and that they can focus on things that are comforting and control their stress response more. So mindful programs in schools are very important, but parents and caregivers and teachers are even more important. We hold the ability to show, demonstrate, and model stress regulation and good sleep habits. And they are looking to us. And even if we're not discussing this explicitly, emotions are contagious, and modeling of behaviors are one of the most important messages. So it's important to put on the oxygen mask first of caregivers, parents, teachers, and to be modeling calm, thoughtful, reflective responses rather than reactive and panicky responses, because that will directly transmit to young minds. and I'll just say lastly, presence, being present, putting down your phone, having eye contact with young people, having intergenerational conversations, transmitting the wisdom that you have as an older person, that you've seen existential crises come and go, that things will be okay, that they will be okay. And part of the, presence is actually meal times together. We are following a cohort of girls they're about 40 years old now. And one thing we've learned from watching youth develop is that dinner time together, family dinner time, is associated with more psychological resilience, with better coping skills in youth. So there's a lot that goes into that. What happens at dinner time, but just the structure and the modeling and the ability to process, reflect, and discuss the day. So one thing that we do in our family is, some of it's because I know stress signs, and some of it's just natural because kids like to talk about, have dinner games. So one is, what was the hardest thing today, and listening and validating, and what was the best thing that happened, savoring, sharing. Those are strategies that we know affect mood. And another one is, when someone tells you something that was very stressful, helping them take some distance and reflect by asking something like, is that situation going to affect you in 5 years from now? Usually the answer is no. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, that's great. Another question that came in via email. This person was curious about, in your book, Dr. Prather, the sort of circadian timing of medication element, and what medications that might be most relevant for, and if there are any things that folks should be paying attention to, or just if this is sort of more like new research that will be coming out.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, such a hot topic, chronomedicine, and beginning to understand kind of when you take things matters, and it matters for individual by individual. And we're just starting to kind of chip away at that. I mean, obviously there are certain things that we've learned, at least with respect to sleep, may be problematic. So there are certain kind of beta blockers that people take for blood pressure that seem to actually suppress melatonin production. And so there have been studies to show that if you take that and you do like a supplementation of melatonin, it may alleviate that. But that's just an example of like that directly affects the sleep system. But absolutely, my guess is that in the next 5 years there will be an explosion of research on these factors and what medications seem to work best. And it really pushes towards kind of like a more precision medicine perspective, that we're not all the average, right? And that's how most of these things are developed. And so we need to better understand kind of the whole tapestry of what makes us us. And that includes our circadian system.
Awesome. And then just to wrap up really quickly, I'd love to hear from y'all, sort of going off of that, what you're most excited about in the future of each of your fields in terms of the future of stress or sleep. I'd love to know where you think we're going and what's really exciting about it. And maybe we can start with Dr. Epel.
Okay, thanks, Ryan.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think Enrique's question is the big question, which is how do we move forward in such a troubled world and troubled society? And, I think I think about that every day. I think about my son I can't stop him from watching media and bad news, and he has a very negative view of humanity, and it's heartbreaking. And so, part of that is these strategies for keeping our hope and keeping our own nervous system well regulated, so that we can emanate that and be contagious in this positive way in this the small world that we inhabit, and the understanding and belief that there is social quantum change. And I write about this in the book, that there are models of social tipping points of how, if we can be living our purposeful life and sharing that, and being with education, awareness, or just direct contact, we can be creating the change that we want, that we are part of this social tipping point. That gives me excitement and hope and makes my life feel more purposeful. So from a social level, I'm interested in those types of interventions and climate interventions, and it's just the right time to be talking to young people about what they can do, seeing all of the red flags from the media, focusing on their agency. And then from a more what we can do in the lab here, I'm so excited about our mind-body studies. We're collaborating with Aura. We're looking at biosensor signals and understanding deep rest and how we can reach restorative states during the day, both green mind, which is letting go of stress and vigilance, as well as deep rest, and having actual metrics for what is deep rest while we're awake, not just when we're in deep sleep. And Alexandra Croswell has led a paper on this. It's on our website, or sorry, it's on my book page in my personal website. We have a preprint, and I just think it's for people interested in this, it's a very exciting paper and model of the next stage of research questions that we can ask to understand how to move our nervous system to adapt to this, ever-changing world, both of positive stress as well as the restoration we need.
Awesome. Anything from you, Dr. Prather?
I mean, I'm excited about all those things. Those are big things. I think, like, I love the fact that kind of some of the silos are coming down. Like, I'm a really big team science kind of person, and I think what Elissa just mentioned around deep rest, right? Like, it's not just the daytime, it's not just the nighttime. It's kind of, and it's been sort of silly that it's been demarcated that way. And so that's why this is such a great partnership. I think in the sleep field, there's so much, I mean, it's a young field, and there are so many groups doing amazing work, really beginning to understand kind of what is going on up there, and like, why does it matter? And, I think we're just scratching the surface. A great example is like sleep staging in itself. Like, sleep staging historically, and to this date, is mostly like a sleep technician like deciding that you are awake or asleep and what stage you're in as it goes by. And clearly we are moving so far beyond that, and there's so many kind of exciting things that are way beyond my intellect to do, but I think we'll begin to really chip away at why sleep and rest are so critical to both kind of our mind and our body, and just our very being. And so I think, lots of things to be excited about.
Yeah, so much to be excited about, and so much happening within the AME itself. A lot of these questions will be answered from the researchers who are part of this group. And so I think we're all just very great. I think I speak for everyone when I say that we're just very grateful for the community here and for everyone who took the time to be here today. We want to be mindful of your time. Dr. Epel, did you have something to say at the?
I meant to just show a heart, not a hand.
Oh, good. Okay, just wanted to make sure. Awesome.
Really appreciate all of you who joined us, and hopefully you're on our AME newsletter list, which we hope you'll join. And we'll continue to share our studies. We're always looking for, summer research interns, new postdocs, and love to share our monthly lectures. We get community clinicians joining now that we have things on Zoom, which is always exciting for us. So thank you everyone for being part of our larger AME community that helps us feel like our work is not just published in a journal, but we have a community also who's really interested in this aging, metabolism, emotion, sleep nexus.
Yeah, stop by anytime.
Thank you so much, everyone. And Elena and Bresh, thank you for running our center.
Ryan, thank you.